How I masterminded Andrew Flynn's third place podium at Britain's Strongest Man. First, let's remind ourselves of the 5 events. Event 1 was the Sandbag Steeple Chase. It had 3 bags of 140 kilos over 15 meters. So that was 2 loads over the yoke and onto the platform. The Deadlift Ladder was event number 2. The weights were changed. It went from 300 to 380 kilos. Third event was duck walk into farmers, 200 kilo duck walk into 150 kilo farmers, both for 20 meters each. Fourth event was 160 kilo Slater Log for reps and ending on the castle stones, which are weighed 120 all the way up to 200 kilos. When I briefed with Andrew Flynn and also Kane Francis, when he was still within the competition, the first thing we looked at and discussed was the order. The thing that stands out is the Sandbag Steeple Chase being event number 1. And if you notice at the results, it completely decimated the field. That is where a lot of the competition was going to be won. If you could get through that event, and more important, if you can recover for the next events, then you were within a chance even, of doing quite well. That was the make or break. You needed a work capacity. You also needed to be able to work under fatigue in a lot of the other events that are going to be coming after it. So how did I train that with Andrew? The sandbag carry, he did most of the runs here at my gym, Winning Strength Southampton. And we would alternate that every other week. So on week 1, 3, 5 and 7, he would do the sandbag carry and load. On the other weeks, the even weeks, weeks 2, 4, 6, 8, he would be doing the duck to farmer's walk. So we would flip-flop them either week to allow recovery. The other reason I'd flip-flop them is because I wanted to keep stones in as a constant. It was a weakness of his, so we wanted repeated exposure. If we look a little bit at how exactly I loaded the Sandbag Steeple Chase, the first 2 exposures were rest pause 30, rest pause 20. What that means is he's going to do a sandbag carry and load, then he's going to take 20 to 30 seconds rest in between. What this does is it allows me to increase the intensity and quality of the runs that Andrew was doing. Andrew is shorter than a lot of the other competitors. If you watch the replay back, you see Shane Flowers next to him. He's a lot taller. He basically loads it from his hip. What that means is Andrew Flynn needs a lot more maximal strength because he has to load it higher per repetition. It also allowed him to drill the technique you saw he used in the video. Andrew, I think, was the only one to lift the sandbag from a vertical. He would just bear hug it, get up and go. Another reason for doing this is the sandbags weren't filled. They were 150 kilo sandbags filled with 140 kilos worth of sand. So they moved a little bit, they're a little bit floppier. What this did is it made the pull a lot harder. So Andrew opted for that vertical lift because it was quicker off the ground, but also that little bit easier over the first few sandbags. After the rest pause, we got into full runs where he was doing 80, 90 and 100% of the load. And then the final week before comp, we just did the first half of the event just to keep things ticking over. On the day, Andrew did really well. He loaded all 6 sandbags. It was an incredibly tough event. The focus in the immediate aftermath of that was ensuring he was able to recover before the deadlift, which again is another posterior chain heavy event. So he's going to have to clear all that lactic acid from his posterior chain, bring his heart rate and his breathing rate down. He came off the event in quite a highly aroused state in terms of recovery. So it took us a lot of effort and conscious focus on bringing that down. I even took him outside, away from all the stimulus where all these strong men are hanging out of their asses. I took him outside for some cooler fresh air. We just tried to get his breathing rate down. I did this with nasal breathing. Once he got a little bit more composed, we brought him back inside because the air was warmer. It's that little bit easier to breathe. And then we started to get him into box breathing. So once we got that, his heart rate started to come down. He was then able to get his deadlift suit on and he was straight back into warming up for the next event. But it was a massively important part and set the tone for the rest of the comp for him. Event number 2 was the Deadlift Ladder. It went 300, 320, 340, 360, all the way up to 380. After planning with Andrew, we opted to use a half suit, so suit with the straps down. The reason being is this would make him nimble over the bars, and the plan was to get the first 3 or first 4 very fast. First 3 quite fast, fourth if he could do it. As you can see in the replay, he opted not to do the 360. He felt it was there, but he didn't want to grind. Again, part of the game plan is looking at the whole competition. He didn't want to grind a rep, have a small aneurysm, and then not be able to recover for the next event. With regards to planning and programming his deadlift, because we were using the conjugate model, he had both a speed day and a neural day. The neural day, the idea was to work maximal strength. We needed his maximal strength up as high as he could have it, because then he's going to be quicker, at least through the lighter bars, and gives himself a higher chance of completing all the bars. His neural day was on day 4, and we alternated quite a few of these weeks, as I do with the good morning, to allow him to recover week to week. The interesting part of his training though was on the speed deadlift day. As I've alluded to, event 1 was horrendous on the posterior chain. So there was a lot of pre-fatigue being carried into the next event, which again, the deadlift is posterior chain. So on the speed day, I used a pre-fatigue. With what Andrew had available, we used glute ham gastroc or Nordic curls straight into his speed deadlifts to get him used to that feeling of pulling with maximal intent, but with fatigued hamstrings and glutes. Event 3 was the carry medley. They had a 200 kilo duck walk into 150 kilo farmers. The key here for Andrew was speed and no mistakes. Drops on this event cost you dearly. Andrew managed to do it without drops. On the duck walk, when he trained it, he was actually training it here at Winning Strength Southampton, and he was training it on bumper plates. If you look on the replay, you'll notice that his feet are quite narrow. With bumper plates, his feet were even wider. When you have that wider stance, it's more challenging and it lights the glutes up more. So what he found was this was a nice transition when he went to Giants Live, because that weight felt much easier. The other element we were looking at trying to train and maximize the speed of the event was the transition from the duck walk into the farmers. Again, if you look back and you compare Andrew to the other athletes, he was, I think, the only athlete that jumped into the farmers, picked them up and got going. That saved him probably around half a second. We drilled this on his speed lower day. So each week we had him drilling, jumping into the farmers and a quick transition pick and then a couple of steps each and every week. One of the smaller items that has helped Andrew with his foot speed was an element in training that I call relevés. I learned it from Dr. Peter Lundgren, who took it in turn from ballet. It is a movement that will train your foot, your flexor hallucis longus, but also your tibialis anterior and posterior. The bottom line is this small movement has allowed Andrew to be a lot quicker with his foot speed, because he's able to absorb more force and get his foot off the ground, and also take a bigger step because the muscles in his foot now match the muscles in his legs. Event number 4 was the log press, and you can imagine by now there's a lot of pre-fatigue that's happened through the events. Their legs, their posterior chain are absolutely smashed. So again, we train with this in mind. The little gem that I gave Andrew just before he went out was, my athletes don't suck at the log, so you better go out and perform. And it's lucky that he did. He managed to get 4 reps right at the buzzer. Obviously those words must have motivated him some. One of the things we were looking at was actually stuff that was happening on the day. What I've learned at Giants Live is sometimes the log can be a bit unbalanced, and we were watching and discussing this with some of the athletes that went out ahead of him. Luckily Andrew could do that because he was later on in the pack, because he won the duck to farmers walk carry medley. So you could see his log was actually coming up a bit earlier, so I was able to explain this to him, to punch his right arm that little bit harder to make sure he was able to lock the log out effectively and efficiently. The other element was he took his time. He had a target. It's much easier when you have a target to aim for. He needed 3, but he got 4, which gave him absolutely fantastic points. With regards to his training, he had 2 log days. One was a speed day, which we actually alternated between doing EMOMs every minute on the minute and speed push press against bands. And then the other day was a heavy day. One of the elements in his program on his heavy day was what I refer to as a log death set. The idea here was to build work capacity. The way to execute a log death set, if you so wish, is to do a set of 3 to 5 clean and press. Once you've done that, and it has to be a pretty maximal 3 to 5, you then perform as many cleans as you can, then you perform as many deadlifts as you can. The idea again here was to ensure that his posterior chain and everything else was used to high lactic acid tolerance to ensure that he was able to perform maximally on the day. The fifth and final event was the castle stones from 120 up to 200 kilos in 20 kilo jumps. The way we trained Andrew for this was maximal strength through his first 3 weeks. He had stones in weekly. As discussed, this was a weakness that had cost him last year in terms of hitting higher placings, winning competitions. So we wanted to train this hard during the off-season. During the off-season, he did a lot of volume. In this peak though, we linearly built up over the first 3 weeks. First week 1 was 3x5, then 3x3, then 3x2. He then had rest pause 3x5. Again, kind of mimicking what you might feel in comp because the set will take that little bit longer. He only did one session where we did an incremental run, and I believe he only went up to 4 stones, which shows you how much he was able to deload, peak and potentiate his performance on the day by doing all of that maximal strength work. The advice I gave him just before we went out was to go get it. The simple thing was he had held back in other comps just because he wanted to have this opportunity at Britain's, which I believe had cost him in terms of winning, say, England's Strongest Man. So the idea here was to say, leave nothing on the table, leave nothing for chance, literally go for it. If he didn't, if he had finished 1.5 seconds slower, he would have come fourth overall. So obviously I'm ecstatic that he did. This achievement from Andrew was up there with one of the highlights of my coaching careers. He's been with me bang on 4 years come this comp, and it's gone 4 years from car park competitions all the way to podium, so a 3rd place at Britain's Strongest Man, an invite to Europe's Strongest Man, and most importantly an invite to World's Strongest Man that I really look forward to preparing him for in the coming weeks.